Good evening, everybody in TikTok land. Welcome to my latest history TikTok. Today, we're going to talk about an event that happened in fairly recent history and an event that happened not too far away from where I'm coming to you from. Currently, I'm just living just a little bit west of Hornpain, Ontario. And the event we're talking about took place just slightly west of Opasatika, Ontario, which is on Highway 11, partway between Hearst, Ontario and Kapuskasing, Ontario. So the scene is 1963, and Kapuskasing has a huge paper mill at the time, owned by foreign interests, primarily American interests. They produced paper, specifically newsprint, but other forms of paper. And among one of their huge clients of the time was New York Times, which, of course, in those days produced massive numbers of newspapers for consumption in the United States. So newsprint was a big item, and the economy of Northern Ontario was intricately intertwined with the newspaper industry and paper making, as well as, of course, lumber. So Kapuskasing had this big mill owned by foreign interests, and they had a lot of contractors who worked in the bush cutting down the trees that would eventually be brought into the mill to be made into paper. Now these contractors, these workers, I guess contractors aren't really the right word. The workers were working in the bush, cutting down the trees, and they were a member of a union. And of course, as usually happens in these sorts of situations, the unions and companies are often not in agreement on how workers are supposed to be compensated. And this was not abnormal at all, especially in the 60s, which was a time around the world of some upheaval, depending on where you were. And my cat walked across the screen. Apologize. Anyway, so back to the strike. Now she's messing up my paper that I'm going to look at every once in a while. Back to the strike. So about 75% of the wood supply that the mill received in Kapuskasing came through the workers who were unionized workers. So the mill was down 75% of its lumber that it needed to make paper. The other 25% was made up with private contractors, primarily farmers in the area who owned property in various areas outside of Kapuskasing, who supplemented their meager incomes with lumber revenue by cutting trees and shipping them off and getting paid by the company to deliver this. So, of course, when the union went on strike, the 75% of those people who were working in the bush were no longer bringing logs in. But the private farmers, private contractors, essentially continued to supply lumber to the mill. Even though this wasn't enough to keep it going completely, they were still able to supply. And there's a railway track currently run by the ONR that runs along Highway 11. And this railway track was often used to bring the supply of wood into the mill. So this one particular day in February of 1963, things had been getting worse. Things were getting more difficult in the strike. Tensions were rising. Of course, you've got small communities, people who knew each other, often people who were related, some of whom would have supported the union, some of whom would have supported the private contractors. You can be almost certain that some of those private farmers probably had, if not friends, family members, other people they knew, community members, who were affected by the strike and who were on strike. So the tensions continued to rise. And what would happen is, in general, when there was a load of wood that was going to head into the mill, the union members did their best to try to prevent that lumber from getting there, whether it was sabotaging the lumber in some way, shape, or form, or just trying to prevent it from being moved. So on the early morning of February 10th, 1963, there was a large load of lumber that was supposed to be heading into the mill, and a number of unionists, over 400 of the union members, headed off to the Reesor Siding, and they were intending to prevent the lumber from being moved. Now, the OPP had wind of this situation, as did the farmers, of course, and a small number of OPP were there to attempt to cordon off the area and prevent the union members from being able to go in and do something with the lumber, whether they were going to sabotage it or just physically prevent it from being moved. But as you can imagine, in the dark of the night, with tensions rising and the union wanting to protect their territory, and of course the farmers wanting to look after themselves and their own families and protect themselves, tensions were not good. The situation was not good. And the farmers, a group of farmers, had decided they were going to protect themselves. and had arrived with weapons, hunting rifles, shotguns, a few pistols, etc. And they were sort of lying in ambush to some degree. And we're waiting for the Unionists, and we're intending to protect their property and protect their source of revenue. And of course, as these things would normally happen, it didn't work out as well as it should have. And some of the farmers ended up firing on the crowd of union members who were attempting to prevent this lumber from being moved into Kapuskasing. 11 union members were shot. 3 of them were shot dead. A riot obviously ensued after that. The situation was stark. Within a day or two, the Inter-Provincial Police had a massive force sent from Southern Ontario to Opasatika to quell everything and to try to get everything settled out. And eventually down the road, several of the farmers were charged with what at the time was the criminal code charge with non-capital murder. And they went on trial in Kapuskasing, and perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, when you consider the concept of a trial by a jury of your peers, none of the farmers were actually convicted of the non-capital murder charge. They were convicted of firearm offenses and paid fines. And of the union members, a little over 100 of them were charged with rioting and were given heavy fines, which the union covered. I think it was around $27,000 worth of fines in 1963, which equates to just under $300,000 today. The unions paid. So what it did do is it sort of pushed the union and the company and the government to try to solve the strike, and the strike was solved along the way somewhere, and everybody went back to work. But as you can imagine, this situation left a great deal of tension in the community between family members, between community members, neighbors, etc. And not long after the event, the union put up a monument just right by the Reesor Siding, which, as I said, is just a little bit this side, a little bit west of Opasatika. And if you're driving on Highway 11 heading towards Kapuskasing from the Long Lac area, you'll see it on the right-hand side. And of course, if you're coming the other way, if you're heading west from Kapuskasing towards Hearst, it'll be on your left-hand side on the other side of the road. It's generally plowed through the winter, and certainly available in the summer. You can stop and read the plaque in both official languages and learn a little bit more about the incident, which took place perhaps not in that precise spot, but very close to that spot. So there you have it. A little bit of history, a little bit of local history, kind of a classic challenge or classic clash between union protections and protections of private property. So it's up to you now to stop and think about it and decide whether the union members were correct in trying to prevent that lumber from being moved into the mill. Did the farmers have the right to protect themselves? And was the fact that no one was actually charged with murder, even though 3 people were killed? How does that all pan out in terms of your own sense of sensibility? All right, that's that. I hope you enjoyed that little bit. If you are somebody living in this area and you're heading to Kapuskasing one of these days, stop and check it out. It's an interesting little site. All right, until the next time, keep reading and keep learning.